If a solution is reached with Israel through the auspices of the United Nations or however, what would be the ultimate relationship between Egypt and Israel? Would it be recognition with an exchange of ambassadors and normalization of relationships? Do you see that in the future?
May I ask a question myself? How many years had the United States refused to recognize China? How many years?
At the presidential residence near Cairo, Egypt, a special edition of Face the Nation, the first television interview with the new president of the United Arab Republic, Anwar El-Sadat. President Sadat will be questioned by CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite. Now here in Washington is CBS News correspondent George Herman.
On Wednesday, Walter Cronkite filmed this exclusive interview with the man who succeeded Nasser as the Arab world's most powerful leader, Egyptian President Sadat. Some parts of the long interview were seen on Thursday and Friday on the CBS Evening News. Today, Walter begins by exploring more fully the Egyptian president's conditions for extending the Middle Eastern ceasefire beyond February 5th. President Sadat insists that a timetable be established for carrying out all of the points of the 1967 Security Council resolution. That resolution calls for withdrawal by Israel to the border which existed before the June 1967 war. This must be the first step, according to President Sadat, to be followed by the ending of the state of war, by recognition of the independence and territorial integrity of every state in the region, free passage of the waterways, settlement of the refugee problem, and a commitment to peace. But the first step, he says, must be an agreement on complete withdrawal to the old borders. Now, Walter Cronkite.
Mr. President, on the timetable for withdrawal, your first point, which you say must be established before you can extend the ceasefire beyond the February 5th termination date. What about the specifics of that timetable? What is your idea there?
Well,
should the Israelis say to you, and would you require that they say, we shall withdraw by such and such a date? Is that what you mean by a timetable?
That's right.
And how early would that date have to be?
Well, my idea in this is if the four powers, and I could have wished that the United States would have made it itself, but as far as I see now, they are taking the side of Israel completely. But if the four powers, for instance, give some guidings to Gunnar Yaring and recognize the withdrawal in these guidings, we consider this a practical step.
Well, now, how does that satisfy a timetable? That doesn't say they will withdraw by such and such a date, does it?
If they give this guide to Gunnar Yaring, well, Gunnar Yaring will be making his negotiations with the parties, with us, with Israel, with Jordan, and then he will prepare for this timetable. And maybe according to some proposals that has been made before by the French or by the Russians, there will be steps for this withdrawal. This would be a practical step towards the fulfillment of the withdrawal and to the Security Council resolution. This is my idea.
Do the Russians or the French at this moment have such a plan to put forward to Yawring?
I think they have done it before.
A plan
In
for
the
withdrawal?
in the four powers meetings. I think they have done it before.
And a renewal of that plan accepted by Yawring as the point of negotiations would satisfy you?
That's it. That's it. That's it.
Would that represent the concrete progress of which you speak that would enable you to extend the ceasefire?
That's right. That will mean that we are starting a practical way for the solution of the problem here in the Middle East. Not to freeze the whole problem and just put it as a new, situation in the Cold War between the two superpowers.
Mr. President, you speak of your hopes and desires for peace.
Yes.
I suppose that must be true of every leader in the world, really.
That's right.
I hope that nobody really wants war. But isn't it necessary that some compromises be made for peace, that each of us give up something in order that we can achieve peace in the world? And I wonder if there's anything that you would give up rather than have war.
It is a very important question. I must tell you this, frankly. Cisco has told our representative there in Washington that we must be prepared for concessions.
This is our Assistant Secretary of State, Cisco, in charge of our Middle Eastern affairs.
The Middle Eastern affairs, yes. We must be prepared for concessions and negotiations. If it to be successful, there must be concessions. Well, what concessions am I going to give? One thing, land. My land is occupied now. Sinai is occupied. And I return again to the remark that I told you. When a part of Florida or Texas is occupied, what concessions are you going to give? The other side can give concessions. The Israelis can give concessions. But what concessions am I going to give except land? No one agree in this country or all over the Arab world will agree to the surrender of 1 inch of the Arab land, because this is part of our land, our dignity, our honor. Well, you ask me now, if the negotiations is to succeed, we must be flexible. For instance, well, how am I going to be flexible when my land, part of my land, 1/5 of my country is occupied? And then you want me to make concessions. What concessions am I going to give?
Does your feeling about this land extend beyond the former Egyptian lands? I mean, Jerusalem, Jordan, Golan Heights, Syria. Does all of that have to be returned to satisfy your conditions?
That's right.
You feel you're negotiating for the entire Arab world?
For the whole land that has been occupied after the 5th of June. After the 5th of June.
You have mentioned the possibility of a 4-nation team, observer team, or troops. I don't know precisely what it is you're suggesting. That's what I'd like to ask. What sort of a patrol over this agreement would you accept or would you suggest?
Well, I accept till the forming of a force from those 4 powers to guarantee the frontiers of Israel and my frontiers also, because I need the guarantee more than Israel. believe me.
Are you speaking of observer teams now, or actually military forces?
Both. I agree to both. On both sides.
On both sides of the frontier.
That's right. That's right.
And would these be under the Security Council with a veto power operating over them?
Well, those who have the veto will be in this power. The four powers. Those who have the veto will be there.
What about would you make an agreement within this area that these forces could not be withdrawn without unanimous agreement of all powers, as opposed to the request from President Nasser in '67 for the withdrawal of the UN observer teams?
Well, when we come to the details, I'm speaking now about the principles. And because you have mentioned the secured borders for Israel. Well, if it is the security borders problem, it is not Israel's problem only, but it is my problem also.
But pursuing this four-power force for the moment, do you think Israel would accept it?
I don't know. But from what we hear, they will not accept it. Because they want expansion. They don't want to fulfill the resolution of the Security Council. Because the first item in this resolution is the withdrawal. They will not agree to this. But if the problem is secured boundaries, well, let us speak about peace commitments and let a force of the four powers guarantee this secured boundaries for Israel.
If you're convinced, and I think you said this before, sir, that Israel will not accept withdrawal, then really what you're saying is that you hold no hope for the current peace talks, since that is your prime condition for them.
Well, let us come to the root of the whole problem. Why doesn't Israel accept this? Israel will not accept because they receive economic aid, military aid, everything they want from the states. Well, if they receive everything they want, why should they agree to withdrawal? Even more than that, Mrs. Meir, 2 days before, declared, and all the Israeli ministers also declared, that the United States policy is with Israel and behind Israel, not to withdraw from the occupied lands before reaching a complete settlement. Well, if Mrs. Meir declared this, and Israel is convinced of this, and receives all this economic and military and political and everything from the United States, why should they agree?
Mr. President, what are your proposals for settlement of the Palestinian refugee problem?
Well, it is a problem that must be discussed on the level of all the Arab leaders and the Palestinians themselves. I can't say for myself.
So there is no immediate plan as to how that could be settled?
But we have the United Nations resolutions as a guide for this.
Is there any consideration given at all to the proposal put forth in several circles? I think that maybe John Foster Dulles first mentioned it, of using atomic power under international auspices to irrigate the Sinai and permit a Palestinian government in the Sinai?
Well, we are not going to surrender any inch of our land as a solution for a problem like this. But we are quite ready to take our part and our responsibility in finding a solution, and a solution based on justice and based also on the United Nations resolutions. We are quite ready to take our part in this, but not to surrender our land for this.
Does this include admitting any Palestinian refugees to Egypt?
They must say they were the Palestinian refugees. They must say their word according to the United Nations resolutions. And they have the right to their land, to their homeland.
In Israel?
In Israel, or on the occupied parts, or in anywhere. They have to say their word.
The Palestinian guerrillas never agreed to the ceasefire proposal or the peace talks. Do you think that a meaningful peace can be achieved without their prior agreement?
Well, it is a very important question. They have the right not to agree to any settlements like this, because the land is their land, their fatherland, their homeland. But when I discuss my problem here, I say this very simply. I want the removal of the consequences of the aggression of '67. This means that we must return to the borders of the 4th of June, '67.
Well, is that likely to satisfy the guerrillas, Palestinians?
It will not satisfy them.
But you think we could achieve peace
They
even though
have
they're
the
not
right.
satisfied?
They have the right not to be satisfied, and they have the right to accuse me or to attack me or so. But this is the fact. This is a fact.
So that you would reach an agreement even if they did not agree. I mean, that would then become their problem to work out on their own. Is that it?
It is my problem also. It will be my problem also. But first, we want to remove all the consequences of the aggression of '67.
In the suggestion that it might be necessary to end the ceasefire on February 5th, how do you visualize hostilities being resumed? In the kind of shelling and occasional frontline raids that have been going on in the past, or is something bigger going to happen?
Well, it is the problem of the military men, and they shall discuss it with them. I have discussed it already, partly, but it will be discussed much more in details.
Do you see this as a coordinated operation with all of the Arab nations? Is there any likelihood of any of the nations not participating with you in that operation?
It is for them to decide. I decide for myself, and it is for them to decide for themselves.
Mr. President, there were some who thought that the statements of President Nasser preceding the '67 Israeli strike against Egypt might have provoked the Israelis into making that strike. Do you have any concern that your statements that you've made here today and that you've made over the last couple of weeks regarding the end of the ceasefire, February 5th, and the necessity to reclaim your lands might again provoke an Israeli attack against you?
Well, it is very simple like that. First of all, I am responsible after all what President Nasser said and done, because I was sharing the responsibility with him, and I was 100% backing him. Second, I'm not provoking Israel. even if this problem is settled, we shall have a war after 5 years. Because Israel wants from the Nile to the Euphrates, like Herzl said. We shall have a war after 5 years. They will not be quiet till they fulfill their dreams and prophecies from the Nile to the Euphrates. It is not statements said by me. I'm just saying this. If there is a practical solution started by Gunnar Yaring up till the 5th of February, we are quite ready for peace. If there is not a practical solution, well, we shall not prolong the ceasefire at all. And this will be our fate. We shall fight to liberate our land, because this is our duty to liberate our land. And there is a difference between liberating our land and waging war to gain a new land from the others.
Do you see any possibility, Mr. President, that a war in the Middle East now could possibly be waged without involving the major powers, specifically Russia and the United States?
Well, this is a problem that I don't agree to at all. I don't agree to at all. And this is a point of difference also between us here and those who are making the policy there in Washington. As I told you, it is the problem for me is just a very simple problem. Part of my land is occupied. This part of my land I want to be liberated by peaceful solution, or if it is not liberated by peaceful solution, it is my right and duty to liberate it. Why should you involve me in the global strategy of Mr. Kissinger and of the power politics and the two superpower politics? Why should you involve me in this? I have no interest to be involved in this at all.
Do you feel that Washington makes Israeli policy in Washington?
It is made combined. For example, President Johnson gave the approval for the aggression on 67. No one denied this in the United States.
I didn't know that.
Yes, he gave the approval. The whole plan was put before him, and he gave the approval. He can't deny this in his retreat in Texas now.
And speaking of the Israeli influence, Washington and Tel Aviv or Jerusalem's association, which do you feel is dominant? Who you say is made between them, but does the United States make policy according to the needs of Israel, or does Israel make policy according to the needs of the United States?
Before 2 months, what I felt, I'm telling you my feelings here. Before 2 months, the interests between Israel and the United States were combined. But since 2 months up till now, I can see that the United States have interests and Israel have interests also. Both of them against us. In the time that I have nothing against the United States at all.
What are the U.S. interests against you?
Put yourself in my shoes. And then try to think, why did the United States give the phantoms to the Israelis to reach our depth in the country here and to raid our factories and schools, the children, the schools, and send an advice in a shape of ultimatum on the 2nd of February 70, telling us that if you don't cease fire, the Israelis will reach all the depths of the country and we can't prevent them, while they are providing them with the phantoms and the bombs and everything. Why should they do this? And I told them, frankly, there is nothing between us and the United States except this Israeli problem. Nothing at all.
If the Israeli problem were settled, you see no other obstacle to an improved United States-Egyptian relationship.
Ultimately, what does the United States want here? At one time they say that the Soviet presence here, according to the strategists there in Washington also, the advisors of President Nixon, saying about the Soviet presence here in the area. Well, the Soviets were here before '67 in the Mediterranean. And they are here after '67 also in the Mediterranean. The only change is that we gave them facilities after '67 because they stood with us in the black hours. We gave them facilities. And mark this, I shall continue to give them facilities, frankly, quite frankly. They have stood with us in the black hours.
Mr. President, unfortunately our time is up. Thank you very much for being with us to Face the Nation.
In today's special edition of Face the Nation, filmed in Egypt, the new president of the United Arab Republic, Anwar El-Sadat, was interviewed by CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite. Next week, another prominent figure in the news will face the nation. Meet the Bunkers in All in the Family, a far-out new comedy that tackles prejudice, politics, and morals head-on. Tuesday night on CBS at 9:30, 8:30 Central Time. Face the Nation was filmed in Egypt on Wednesday and edited.